Whoa, wait a second. What do you mean the Queen's waking up? Jax shouted. Are you royalty? Maybe that's something you could have told me. No, that's not it, Mayrie called out. I think I understand. I never expected it. Never expected what? Jax said, sounding extremely confused. Listen, on my world, there are legends, stories passed down by the Veyri, the tree ancients, the ones who keep the knowledge and pass it down through the generations as their purpose. According to them, nature has its own energy. This is something that all Skyray know. In fact, all the people of my homeworld know this. But nature energy is not confined to a single world or point or place. It is an energy that encompasses all things in the universe. There is a flow of power and energy that brings life to all things in this universe. Sometimes, when they are in need of it, the forces of nature can find one common living thing, a being of nature such as them, a plant, one that they deem worthy. This individual essentially becomes the representative for nature itself, for its will and intent. The problem with most other living beings is they refuse to see plants as living beings. They never think of us the same way they think of themselves. But all races have their rulers. Human beings have kings and queens, as do animals, kingdoms, countries, planets, governments. All have those who are assigned to rule and given power and influence. This is not something that is beyond nature. Even in nature, in plants, one being can be given rule by nature, bestowed the title of king or queen. It is an ancient legend passed down on my world. It is said that it was the first ruler, the first one given right and privilege by the forces of nature on our world, who sprang to life all things, created the grand forest and the countless races that inhabit my world. This individual on my world is known as the king or queen, and the process by which they become the king or queen is known as the royal bloom, the point at which a king or queen emerges as such, quite literally blossoming into a ruler. It was at that point that Jax began to notice a furrowing in Mayrie's face as she clutched across her midsection with one arm, the other covering her mouth, which was beginning to press, a few tears running down her face. Mayrie? What's wrong, Mayrie? Jax called out. She was so robbed, Mayrie said. Robbed of everything she was entitled. Robbed? What are you talking about? Jax called out again, beginning to close in on Mayrie, placing his hand on her shoulder and trying to look her in the eye. Mayrie turned in his direction, tears still running down her face. Do you have any idea? If Rose was on our home world when this happened, she would have been crowned ruler, queen of our entire world. Every living being that resided there would have knelt before her in this moment. Every living being on our world would have been able to sense this, to feel it in their bones as nature cried out, "A queen has come." And now, my daughter blooms alone, a queen in a world with no others like her, she said, tears still running down her face as she stared in Rose's direction. The grass had now completely encompassed her, covering her feet across. nearly a 6-foot wide dome of grass that seemed to press together so hard that it was almost as if it was forming something else. A gigantic bulb. Just then, they began to feel a rumble in the ground, as if there were an earthquake. Small rocks beginning to skitter across the surface of the ground, as they saw massive vines beginning to tear their way up, ripping through rock and stone and earth, tearing the area around that bulb to shreds, burrowing their way in and out, spreading wider, as that massive bulb began to lift upon the top of what seemed like a massive stalk, raising off of the ground, higher and higher, twisting, curling, and whirling around itself. Massive leaves beginning to spread out as it lifted the bulb into the air, higher and higher. It was nearly 60 foot tall by the time it stopped growing, the roots finally ceasing their progression outward and downward into the earth. It was at that point that they finally began to notice fireflies, countless fireflies, filling the air in numbers so large that they could hardly believe it. They were everywhere. Wind whipped the area. The grass swayed in the breeze, and yet the breeze itself seemed to circulate, winding around this massive stalk so tightly that they could actually see the circle in the grass as it bent in the breeze, whirling in circles around the stalk. Fireflies caught in the mix, in a swirl of light that seemed to flow towards the top, where the fireflies spread out into the sky at the top of the 60-foot stalk. Mayrie fell to her knees, staring up at the stalk, the bulb on top, pulsating. "Holy crap," Jack said, staring up at it. In no time at all, Emily had made her way through the clearing to stand beside Mayrie and Jax, joining them staring up at this stalk as it pulsated like a heartbeat again and again. Thump, 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 slowly, steadily, pulsating. Soon enough, they began to see another glow joining the fireflies. But it wasn't bugs in the air. It was pulsations of light that pulsated in the same rhythm as the heartbeat of that bulb that lied on top of the stalk. An ominous green glow flowing up from the roots in the ground, flowing through the stalk, 60 foot up to that massive bulb. With every thump, the bulb growing larger, the green light that filled that stem growing more intense. In no time at all, they began to notice other things arriving. Plants and insects and small animals like snakes and frogs, all making their way into this clearing, beginning to gather around this massive stalk. As they looked out into the distance, seeing all the trees swaying in the wind, there too they saw it, an ominous green glow that covered the leaves, each pulsation causing the leaves of all of the countless trees that filled the entire forest, flowing out into the distance, all of them a light green. Looking far out into that distance, they could actually see the flow of that green light like a massive pulse stretching out from the entire world itself in a massive flow, like a ripple going in reverse, everything pulsating towards this single point. The Queen of Nature, deemed worthy by nature itself, granted power by nature itself, Jack said as she stared out into this massive flow of natural energy. I have to tell you, I have seen a great deal of things in my lifetime. Crap you would not believe. But if you told me that I'd be seeing this right now, I'd have laughed in your face. Told you that that wasn't possible. But it seems like the universe just loves proving me wrong, he said as he stared back up towards the bulb, suspended there in the air. Now they could clearly, visibly see that the grass had molded itself into large leaves that were beginning to unfurl, snuggled tightly within them, massive red petals, as the pulsations of green light continued flowing up to the bulb. As they reached the bulb itself, the hue of the energy seemed to change, becoming red, brightening, brighter, brighter, and with every pulsation, with the light growing brighter, they could see a shadow from within the bulb, of a figure. Suddenly, the pulsations began to give off physical energy that they could see, that wasn't carried in an object or flowing through the grass or the leaves itself, but that seemed to float in the air, like an aurora of red energy, swirling around the bulb, each pulsation giving off more as the leaves spread wider. Finally, the petals themselves began to unfurl, as everything in nature seemed to alight, the green glow of all of the trees surrounding them and flowing off into the distance, growing intensely bright, finally giving off one last massive pulsation. The green energy that flowed towards this location so intense it was almost blinding as it swirled towards the top, entering the red rose section, the petals finally unfurling entirely. There was a massive burst of red natural energy that seemed to fill, pulsing out into the skyline, filling the sky with a red aurora of light, so bright that the stars themselves seemed dim in comparison. Mei had to shield her eyes as the light was too intense to actually look at. But Jax and Emily didn't flinch. Their eyes stayed glued to the top of that stalk. Now a massive rose bloom spread open in the sky. There in the center, a beacon of red light, a young girl stood. Her hair seemed to drift aloft, as if carried by the breeze, like it was on fire, glowing brightly, shining down on everything in the area. That slender female physique stepping to the edge of the rose. From their back began to emerge 6 very long, vibrant red petals. Their length seemed almost impossible, 20, maybe 30 foot long. They flowed in the breeze like silk ribbons of red lighting the night, glowing brilliantly. As she stared off into the skyline of the night, the light of the moon cresting down, they could see glowing red eyes that now began to peer down at them. "Rose? Is that you, Rose? Are you all right?" Mei called out, as Rose stared down at them with those red eyes. Standing atop this massive stalk, in the center of a massive rose, the red energy that filled the skyline finally beginning to dissipate. With no warning whatsoever, she jumped from the top of the stalk. "Rose?" Mei shouted. "Rose!" as she began to fall towards the ground. Before, those long flowing petals, like red silk in the breeze glowing brightly, spread out acting like a parachute, gently lowering her to the ground slowly as she finally made contact gently on the surface of the ground, her hair still glowing brightly, those red petals whirling around in all directions. And she looked at Mayrie, Jax, and Emily, her eyes glowing a bright red. "Rose? Is that still you, Rose?" "Yes, Mom," Rose said, sounding very serious. "It's me. I am still me, I think," she said as she began to look herself over. As she did, Rose began to note that not everything was as it was. Rose had actually grown. Not a massive amount, but she was at least an inch or two taller than she was. Looking down, she could also tell that her chest was somewhat bigger. Her legs looked somewhat longer. Rose was having a hard time gauging it by looking at herself, but she had undergone some development. She now looked at least a year or two older than she actually was. Mayrie began to approach, slowly taking steps towards Rose. For the first few steps, she was hesitant, as if she was unsure of what to do. But as if to cast that question aside, Rose quickly ran over, embracing her mother, hugging her tightly. "I'm okay, Mom. It's all right." And in that moment, Mayrie breathed the biggest sigh of relief. It appeared her daughter was still her daughter.